1973, a couple things I mentioned that we knew about the climate change. Just a few statistics that White brought in, 28% of the farms were gone, and we were losing 10 to 15,000 acres of farmland a year. Here's an interesting one. We were producing 86% of our food, of our vegetables and small fruit at that time, and today it's 43%. What we're hoping to do with what I call regenerative agriculture, putting composts on the soil, rebuilding the soils, getting the small-scale agriculture going again, is to regain that missing 43% that we used to produce. The land is by and large still there, unless they build a port on it, unless they put the Seedy dam on it. Since 1973, we did hold the line on most of our farmland. And if we can bring back a regenerative type of agriculture, we can produce that 86% of our food once again. Just as a reminder, I mentioned here that the ALR legislation brought in farmland protection, but a lot of farmers have forgotten. It also had an agricultural income assurance program. We guaranteed that you wouldn't go broke. So if a commodity was down, we had ways of subsidizing it. People paid into the fund and the government paid out. Blueberries right now is one of the most productive farming enterprises in BC. The blueberry farmers are wealthy. They're buying land at $100,000 an acre to plant blueberries. Back in 1973, they were on the verge of bankruptcy. They had a blueberry co-op that went bankrupt. And with the agricultural income assurance, we shored them up and saved the blueberry industry. And now it's one of our most productive. The other thing that the ALR did back in 1973 is it allowed for a land bank to purchase and lease farmland. And staff on the Agricultural Land Commission were doing that, and that part was gutted. But that's what we're doing now at the local level in Richmond with all the land that we've been acquiring for these incubator farms. In Richmond now, the city of Richmond is the biggest farm owner. We own 350 acres, which is huge. The next biggest owner is 324 acres, and it's a corporation that's trying to get their land out of the Agricultural Land Reserve. What else? The other thing we had in 1973 is we had an industrial land reserve, because we knew that if industrial land was eroded away for housing and commercial and urban development, they'd come looking for farmland. And so part of the Land Act was to establish an industrial land reserve of all the industrial land that was in industry at the time. That included the entire Vancouver waterfront, where they now have hotels, convention centers, and all kinds of facilities. And what's interesting about that is that the Port of Vancouver that wants to build on the best farmland in the Fraser Valley because there isn't enough industrial land, they have their office in Canada Place, luxurious offices, along with the Premier and the Cabinet Ministers in Canada Place, and all these buildings that they built themselves on what was the industrial heartland of British Columbia. So they created the problem by destroying the industrial land, and now they're coming to us to take the farmlands. Genetic diversity. This is a bit of a quickie. The first seeds were allowed to be patented were in 1975 in the UK. And in 1981, myself and others saw that seed companies were disappearing. Sanctuary Seeds in Vancouver, Buckerfields, there was a whole list of local seed companies that just all disappeared. And they all had open pollinated varieties of vegetables that had been grown here for 100 years. So they were adapted to our climate and adapted to our soils. And they were being bought out and shut down, and the seed stock disappeared. And it was in 1981 that we decided to do something about it. The Seed Savers Exchange was born that year. fellow named Kent Wheatley, organized a survey. They found it went all across North America, got every catalog from every seed company that was in existence at the time and for a few years before to see what was happening to our seed stock, and found out that it was disappearing. So we joined the Seed Savers Exchange at the beginning in 1982, and we started saving our seeds and the seeds from the companies in the Lower Mainland that had disappeared, and we collected about 50 different varieties of vegetables. About 3,000 varieties were lost. And these are the varieties that are adapted to different elevations, to different soils, to different latitudes. And they're being replaced with GMO crops that are only adapted to Mexico and California. Think about it. If you take some of the seeds that, say, for the tomatoes, that's where they come from, grow them here, they may not do that well because they are adapted, and they're not even genetically modified. They have just been on these monocultures for 50 years. So they're adapted to different climates than ours. And genetically modified plants, by and large, are the same way. They kill weeds, but they don't necessarily, aren't necessarily as productive as the plants we had before. They just simply are kill weeds or kill bugs. And what we saw happening in 1982 was corporate control of the seeds and of the pesticides and eventually to food. And Monsanto planted its first GMOs crops in 1996, and it spread ever since. See, I've covered this. Well, that's a picture. That's Delta. One item I should mention at the bottom corner. That's the Spetafor farm in Delta. It's been a contentious issue, 500 acres. And they've come up with a new plan, and I want to warn you about it. And this is it's probably going to work. They've been trying to get the land out of agriculture for the last 20 or 30 years. They got it out of the agricultural land reserve. It was deemed to have been done illegally, but nobody ever put it back in. And it's been zoned agriculture by Delta, and it's been zoned agriculture by Metro Vancouver. They came to Delta, agreed to take it out of agriculture about 20 or 30 years ago in the mid-80s, and Metro Vancouver refused. Delta has agreed to take it out of agriculture again, and it goes to the Planning and Ag Committee of Metro Vancouver next week. And how they're doing it is they're saying, we will donate 80% of the farm to Delta or somebody to farm whatever you want, as long as you can let us build 1,000 homes on the other 20%. And it's called not urban agriculture, but agricultural urbanism. Twisted words. And they've tried it in Richmond already. The 324 acres I mentioned in Richmond that said the developers are trying to get it out of agriculture, that's the plan they had. They came to Richmond Council and said, we'll donate 80% of the 320 acres to the city of Richmond, and you can set up your farm school, you can have your lawn and gardens, just let us build on 20%. And we said no. But in Delta it's out of the agricultural land reserve, the Richmond land wasn't. Delta has said yes. And our big fear is that the owners in Richmond will be back with the same 20%, 80% deal, and you'll find them here wanting to have agricultural urbanism here, take a farm, build on 20%, we'll donate 20%, because the value of that 20% taken from agriculture to urban use is phenomenal. My estimate of the Spetafor farm is that for his $1 million investment he has in that property for the last 20 or 30 years, he'll make $50 or $100 million profit on it. It's pretty big bucks. Farmland, when it was acquired at that time, was probably $20,000 an acre, and that 20% of 500 acres will be worth more than $5 million an acre after it gets approved, if it gets approved. So I just want to tell you about that, because if that goes ahead at Metro, and there's a chance it will, then you'll see a lot more people coming and saying, let's try agricultural urbanism here. And what they'll tell you is, they'll tell you exactly what I've just told you. Young people want to go farming. They can't farm our 500-acre farm because we own it, but we'll give you 80% of it, and then you can let them farm it. And that's the deal. And that's what they're offering down in Delta. That on the Spetafor land, they'll have the incubator farms, they'll have the allotment gardens, they'll have all the things we're doing in Richmond. But let's make a deal. We want to have 1,000 houses before we let you do that. I mentioned earlier, we've known since 1957 that the climate was changing. And Sverre Pedersen, who made that announcement, by the way, was not only the world's top climatologist, he was actually the climatologist that helped us win World War II. He advised the Allies when they were invading Germany. There were storms coming in, and they went in right between storms. The Germans weren't aware they were coming. They said, nobody's going to come and invade us in the middle of this raging storm. Well, he knew there was a few hours break, and that's when they did the D-Day landing in the break between storms, and the Germans weren't prepared. That's the kind of climatologist he was, and he's the one that said the climate is changing, and he was absolutely right. 50 years to the day, the Arctic ice had melted, and that's what he predicted in 1957. Well, now we've got droughts in Texas, and now in Arizona. Texas sold off their cattle herds a couple of years ago. Arizona is reducing its herd by 20% at this very moment. And I've heard there's a big rainstorm in California right now, but last week they were saying that 500,000 acres is parched like the picture and will not be planted this year. And I've also heard the report today that even this rainstorm will dry up in a few days. That 500,000 acres is what produces food for British Columbia. As a cattle rancher, I'm delighted, because it means the price of beef is going to go up. If Texas isn't competing and Arizona isn't competing, it's going to be good for farmers, but it's not going to be good for consumers, and particularly with the crops. So we have to speed up the process of getting our land back into production. We have to speed up the process, or the warning that we can't take any more of our land out of agriculture, that we have to put more land into agriculture, like the Ministry of Agriculture told us several years ago, that we have to add farmland, not take away from the farmland. Because if we can't depend on 500,000 acres of crop production in California, we probably can't depend on Mexico either. They've got the same problems. And Australia is burning up. It's happening all over the world. It's not so much the climate change, it's the revolving weather patterns, and nobody's quite sure how it works. But one example is if you warm up the Pacific Ocean, and the ocean gets quite warm, it stays that way, and that affects all the air currents. I mean, who had ever heard of an Arctic a polar vortex? I never heard of it before until just a few weeks ago. Now it's at the tip of everybody's tongue. Oh yeah, it's the polar vortex that's getting us. Well, where did it come from? I never had one before. And that's the kind of thing we can expect. And that tells us how important it is. Down at the bottom here, I've mentioned the Ministry of Agriculture purchasing policies. Some people are talking about it here. We set up a local purchasing policy in Richmond a few years ago as well. One way we got around it, we had one egg producer, and they produce organic eggs. So we passed a motion of council that we would only provide organic eggs in our facilities in Richmond that are owned by the city. And people complained about it, but there was nothing they could do about it. We hadn't said we're only going to buy local eggs. We said we'll buy organic eggs. There was only one organic egg producer around River Farm. And they've got a chain of other organic egg producers through the valley, so it is not exactly local. We were challenged back east with our purchasing policy because we said we wanted to purchase other things locally as well. We were threatened with court action, and they didn't do it. We weren't quite sure, I'm not sure why. We were given an award by the Sierra Club and Sierra Legal as one of the first cities in Canada to set up a local purchasing policy. And maybe that's what helped, because whoever was going to sue us, I guess, got cold feet. Under NAFTA, you're not supposed to do that. The other advice that we've got is set up a land trust. Now, originally the Agricultural Land Commission was supposed to be the land trust. They were supposed to buy land and then lease it back. We don't have a land trust in Richmond, We have a high growth city center, and we are building 14-story high-rises. They go higher, but the planes couldn't land, so we're allowed 14 stories in the city center. And we charge development cost charges on those buildings to provide parks for the people that are going to live in those apartments. So about 3 or 4 years ago, we got clever, and we declared that every park can have agriculture in it. And that's how we put agriculture at Terra Nova Park. And now we're buying farmland because our farms that we buy are now parks. These are park DCCs. And so that's how we bought the Fantasy Gardens site. It was a $2 million site using DCCs for development over there. It's not how we bought the Garden City lands, that's another story. But we are buying farmland as parkland, and then we've declared it as parks because there's a trail through and people can walk through and see people planting their gardens and enjoying the food they produce. The fellow from the United Nations, when they came over 6 years ago, said in Beijing, the city spreads for miles and there's no food, no plants, nothing. And they bulldozed a city block, cleared it, planted allotment gardens, and it's become a major tourist attraction. People have never seen how food grow, walk through, and that's now a park in Beijing. Well, we're doing it in Richmond. I mentioned, yeah, the development cost charges. Oh, value capture. And that's another idea that is similar to a development cost charge, except we're using value capture now in developing housing. We had a great debate at Richmond Council a week ago because the developer said your value capture is too high. We're rezoning the eastern section of Richmond as a residential area from single family to townhouses and condominiums. And we said we want a childcare center, we want a community center, we want a new fire hall, a whole pile of amenities that go along with it. We don't want you to go and build all these apartments and condos, and then we have to raise taxes to pay for those amenities. So we said, we want you to pay up front. And we calculated out how much money the developers are going to make in this 300 or 400 acre redevelopment, and it's in the millions. And we said, we want 85% of that. So you will make 15 or 20 or 30 or 40 million just in the rezoning. And we'll collect the rest as you sell it to pay for all those amenities. So that's called value capture. And we've been doing it for years for community centers and things like that. But there's no reason we can't be doing that again to acquire farmland to feed the people. You give them recreation, you give them schools, you give them community centers. Why not food too? And then the other term I keep using for the school gardens, the allotment gardens, the community gardens, the leased land, and the incubator farms is the good old health name, MSA, Medical Services Association? No. Municipally supported agriculture. New concept. It used to be that only federal and provincial governments supported agriculture. But here we are with municipalities supporting agriculture. At the senior level, however, got one note there, higher taxes are needed on unfarmed private lands because we have a lot of landowners that are quite wealthy and quite happy to pay the taxes and not have the land farmed. And if the taxes went up on those unfarmed lands, there's a good chance they might lease it out, at least as young people who want to go farming. Okay, here's the pictures. Terra Nova Rural Park, established in 2004. $26 million referendum, 100 garden plots, the Schoolyard Society, 500 children, a sharing farm providing for the food bank, a healing garden that grows municipal herbs, and the United Nations sponsored farm school established in 2006, and the incubator farm started in 2011. I mentioned that before, but that picture gives you an idea. This is our park plan, showing the layout, and you'd have to look at it a lot more closely, where the trails are, where the different gardens are. And part of it actually, I haven't mentioned, but originally, before the dikes went in, there was a major slough and a First Nations village, and they caught fish. And so we have opened up the slough, daylighted it, we call it. I dug the slough up. We haven't got it through the dike yet because our engineering staff don't want us to cut a hole in the dike. But we're trying to work on them because we think that if we open up a hole in the dike, we'll have salmon spawning in this area again. And it runs right through the middle. You can see there's a blue line going all the way through. That's the original slough. We dug it open and it seeded itself with cattails and bulrushes and marsh grasses all by itself without us even doing it. It's full of ducks, but we haven't got any fish in there yet. So when we open up the dike, we're hoping to have spawning salmon again. So we'll have farmland and we'll have fish. Metro Vancouver, and that's like my other hat, we set up a study for a food system strategy. And we have been taking an inventory of all the farmland in the region. And this is I don't know if you're doing it here or not, but we pretty well completed it. We sent out city staff working with Ministry of Agriculture staff, went to every property that's in the agriculturally zoned area to find out what's being farmed and what isn't. And so we will soon have an inventory of all the farm fields that are sitting vacant because the farmer or the owner isn't a farmer, doesn't want to farm, and we'll know. And then we can try and work out some ways of getting those properties farmed. We have also set up what we call a food system academy for Colony Farm. And Colony Farm was the original Canadian experimental farm in Coquitlam. It was shut down some years ago. It was actually established, believe it or not, to introduce agriculture to the people of British Columbia 100 and some years ago, when we were just learning how to till the soil. And it was used to teach things like rotating your crops and adding compost and manures to the soil. And the federal government decided we didn't need that any longer and shut it down. Well, Metro Vancouver has decided that we need it again, and Metro Vancouver acquired the land from the federal government. We aren't working on it right now because we got an Indian land claim on it, and we're trying to work that out first. But the plan is to have a 40-acre working farm with a bona fide farmer working it and getting the income from that farm himself. And that would be sort of the person that looks after all the incubator farmers who will be farming around them. Part of it will be for an ecological area. Part of it will have windrows and fence rows where weeds can grow up. That you know, the stuff that keep poisoning the thistles that the butterflies are going extinct because they don't have. We put some of those things back again along the fence rows. So it wouldn't be sterile. We want to show that you can farm in an area that isn't 100% weed-free, that there are some things that wildlife need as well, and they can coexist. And this is a picture of the Colony Farm with the Coquitlam River going through it. And hopefully we'll get that going in a couple of years. It is based on the programs we're doing in Richmond. 640 acres in the Colony Farm, and the 40-acre main farm. 77 acres will be in parcels 2 to 10 acres in size, micro farms or incubator farms. And there'll be 32 acres for schools, universities, allotment gardens, and therapeutic gardens for people with disabilities and things like that. And there's what used to be Fantasy Gardens. It's right next to where the castle used to be, and you can see all the rows and rows that are shown in that picture of the allotment gardens and the incubator farms. There were some ponds in there. Van der Zam had a biblical garden. Well, we're keeping some of the ponds, and that'll be the park part, and the rest of it will be the incubator farms. Now, what's interesting about this is that decades ago, we made an agreement with the churches in the area to allow churches along what's called Number 5 Road, somewhat to the west of Highway 99, as a buffer. And 2/3 of their lands were to be farmed, and they weren't. And this opens up that whole area, several hundred acres behind the churches, that we hope will be put into agriculture with this program. So we're starting here, and then we're hoping to work with the churches to farm their lands as well.
What did you do with the castle?
We kept the castle. We decided we declared it a heritage site. Van der Zand, I mean, whoever had a premier with a castle? So it had to be a heritage site. So we've converted it to a daycare center. So I think it's no more Van der Zand, lots of little kids. That's the Garden City lands, and Arzina and a group came up with these drawings. These are just sketches that citizens came up with. 136 acres, about 85 acres is pristine peat bog, sphagnum bog. It's not very good bog because over the years we've drained it. And the water table is supposed to be within 14 inches of the top, whatever it is in centimeters, about that much from the top. And it isn't, it's way down there because we keep pumping Richmond out. So we're going to try and figure out ways of diking it to keep the water table up to recreate that sphagnum bog again. And instead of filling it, we'll probably put some posts down and some boardwalks over the bog. And we're hoping that way we can get the type of agriculture that was there for thousands of years. When I was a little kid, and my parents and grandparents before me, that was the breadbasket of Richmond. Every fall we went there to pick the blueberries and the cranberries. And in the old days, people came up from Vancouver when they had the interurban tram, and they take buckets and buckets of cranberries and blueberries, low bush blueberries, off that site. And that's all gone when we built the city and pumped all the water out, and the sphagnum has sort of collapsed. But we're hoping that we might be able to bring that back, and that's what we're looking at. So that'd be about 85 acres, and the rest of it we're looking for some types of urban agriculture, maybe even a place for, at one corner, for a farmer's market or things like that. We haven't really planned it out yet. We're in the planning stages right now. And what we have said to our staff at the city is that we want it all planned out this year because the election comes this fall, and we've got a unanimous support of the present council to do it, so we want to get it all planned this year in case there's changes in council. So watch for that. Okay, I think I've covered most of this on the GMOs. Yeah, my comment is scientifically impossible to produce more food with minerals that no longer exist in the soil. That's if you take anything home about GMOs tonight, take that. You cannot produce more food if you've depleted the soil minerals. And yet that's the claim of the GMO agriculture. If you put GMOs on, you kill weeds, but you cannot produce what isn't there. And that's the microbes in the soil and the trace elements that plants need to produce nutritious foods. So to feed the world, we need to maintain our genetic diversity and replenish our soils. Okay, we're getting to the end. This is our farm today. We've got cows, tomatoes, and alfalfa, no GMO. And where those tomatoes are, believe it or not, that's our manure pile. We have our manure pile, our own composting system. We set up 4 piles, flatten it off, cover it with tarps, and let it decay for a year. And the following year, we plant crops in them. And the yield of tomatoes going on 100% pure cow manure is unbelievable. And those are our Belgian Galloways in the background. A bit about tomatoes. I mentioned about selecting for climate and soils. Tomatoes at one time were selected for flavor, early varieties, yield, antioxidants, and medicinal use. And we grow 6 varieties of tomatoes, and we grow one variety called Alpha. And we've got the only people on the planet that have this variety. It's been around for 100 years. We grew it 100 years ago. And it comes in production 2 to 3 weeks earlier than any other tomato, and that's what was growing on top of our manure pile. The reason they don't grow in commercial fields is you can't stake it. It's a creeping tomato. It grows like low bush blueberries. It grows in a rosette. And so on our manure pile, we take the big tarp off and put another tarp on it, which is full of holes, and we plunk the plants in the hole, and we just let the tomatoes grow on top of the tarp. no weeding, no nothing. They just grow and produce great volumes of tomatoes. But that's why they're not commercial, because they like the ones that are steak, that are determinate, that don't grow too tall. But we've been growing them out in the road in front of my son's house to show people the difference. And we have ripe tomatoes when the standard varieties are in the green stage or just in the bloom stage. It's quite amazing to see. We have several other types of tomatoes. One that we grow that's a purple variety. And I just found out last week that Monsanto, or some of the chemical companies, has invented a GMO tomato that's purple. And the reason they've done it is to increase the amount of antioxidants in the tomato. And somebody else discovered they've already got a purple tomato in Brazil that does exactly the same thing as the standard tomato they've been growing for years. And I thought, well, shoot, I've got one. I didn't know it was so important. So we're going to grow purple tomatoes this year and see if we can compete with Monsanto. Alfalfa. For those that are in dairy farming and in beef production, if you want to be organic, about the only way you can do it right now is with alfalfa. And this is the heart of our success story as cattle ranchers. We grow alfalfa. We've got a cattle ranch at Cache Creek, between Cache Creek and Kamloops. And it was a sad story initially, about 10 or 15 years ago. The climate, our microclimate was changing, and we down below, we're up at the high level, the tree level, and down below it's sagebrush and cactus. And the cactus and sagebrush was hidden for our place, coming up the hill. And we weren't getting as much rain, and we used gravity flow irrigation, not as much snow, and we found out our last crop of hay, and alfalfa hay, instead of being that high, was only about that high, and it wasn't worth the effort of cutting it. So one year, a few years ago, we said, well, we're going to put our cows on alfalfa. Everybody said, oh, you can't do that, they'll bloat and die. Well, you stuff them full of hay and put them on for an hour, take them off. You do that for several days till they get adapted to the alfalfa, and they're all right. And wow, they started putting on fat. But our alfalfa field was soon consumed. So we went to our neighbors, the Skeetchens and Indian Reserve, who've got miles of alfalfa field with no cows, and said, how would you like to let us put our cows there for the winter? So one of the fellows said, okay, your cows are probably going to mash up my field, and if I don't like it, I'll kick them off. So we put our cows down there, and they didn't mash up the field. And after 2 or 3 years, the guy comes and says, I don't have to fertilize it anymore. Your cows are doing it. And that's exactly what we're organic. They're not. And so we didn't have to tell them, we'd like you to be organic. We made them organic. Anyway, this shows a picture of our tomatoes as before we took, actually we make the tomatoes into tomato juice and collect the seeds. Okay, this is the final end of the story. This is the compost pile. The dome is the anaerobic digester, just constructed a year ago. And the compost doesn't look very big there, but it's taller than this building. It's a huge pile. And you get the idea when you look at the tractor down below loading it. Just monster piles of compost. And when you figure we're going to have compost from yard waste and food waste from every city in metropolitan Vancouver, that's going to be a lot of compost. And if we can put that back in the soil and build those soils up again the way they were 50 years ago, that's going to be fantastic. Find a couple pictures of our tomatoes. The fourth pile every year we give away. And all the urban gardeners come and back up to the manure pile, and you can see all the cars with the trunks open. Well, that's our neighbors all shoveling manure into the back of their cars. We've got a lot of Chinese immigrants that have come in, and they're just learning gardening. And we'll have BMWs and all kinds of things, loading cow shit in the back. I didn't dare take any of the pictures, but that's I took it from that, you couldn't see who was loading it. But a $50,000 car is loading up cow manure. And there's some of our babies. That's our cars. Anyway, thank you very much.